They laughed at the poor mechanic who slept beside his broken tools. They called him a homeless nobody. Some even threw coins at him like he was a beggar. But what no one in that busy South African street knew was that the young man they mocked was actually the son of a powerful billionaire, and the girl selling bread and akara on the roadside. The only person who showed him kindness would one day become the woman who helped him build an empire. But his journey was not easy. He would face humiliation, betrayal, hunger, and heartbreak. Until the day the truth was finally revealed, and the same people who mocked him would stand in shock as his billionaire father arrived. This is the unbelievable story of a rich man's son who chose to live like the poor, and the orphan girl who changed his destiny forever.
Before you continue, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this powerful story.
The night Daniel Harrison asked his father for permission to leave home was a night that would change the course of his life forever. The Harrison mansion stood on a quiet hill overlooking the glowing lights of the city. It was a palace of glass, marble, and gold, proof of the empire built by Richard Harrison, one of the most powerful businessmen in the world. Inside the grand dining hall, a long table was covered with expensive dishes, yet the room felt strangely silent. Daniel sat across from his father, staring at the untouched food in front of him. At 27 years old, Daniel had everything most people spent their entire lives chasing. Luxury cars filled the garage, private jets waited whenever he wished to travel. Servants handled every small task before he even thought about it. Yet deep inside, Daniel felt something he could not explain: emptiness. Richard Harrison noticed the silence and placed his fork down slowly. "Daniel," he said calmly, "you've hardly eaten. What's on your mind tonight?" Daniel lifted his eyes. For a moment he hesitated, as if the words were heavy stones in his chest. Then he finally spoke. "Father, I want to leave." The sentence hung in the air like a sudden thunderclap. Richard frowned slightly. "Leave where?" "I want to go somewhere far away," Daniel replied quietly. "Somewhere no one knows who I am." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying his son's face carefully. "You already travel anywhere you want," he said. "If you want another country, we can arrange it tomorrow." "That's not what I mean," Daniel answered. His voice became firmer. "I want to live like an ordinary man." Richard's brows tightened. Daniel continued before his father could interrupt. "All my life, people have treated me differently because of your name. They respect me before I earn it. They praise me before I achieve anything. But how will I ever lead your company one day if I don't understand the real world?" The room became quiet again. Outside the tall glass windows, the wind rustled the trees on the hill. Daniel took a deep breath. "I want to learn a real skill," he said. "I want to work with my hands. I want to know what life is like for the people who struggle every day." Richard Harrison slowly folded his hands together. For decades he had built an empire through discipline, intelligence, and ruthless determination. The idea that his son wanted to abandon comfort and walk into hardship sounded absurd. Yet when he looked into Daniel's eyes, he saw something he rarely saw in them before: determination. "You think the world is some kind of adventure?" Richard asked quietly. "Do you know what real struggle looks like?" Daniel nodded. "I know it won't be easy. That's exactly why I need to experience it." Richard stood up and walked slowly toward the window. The city lights stretched endlessly below them, the same city where he had once started with nothing but ambition and courage. For a moment, old memories crossed his mind. Then he turned back toward his son. "Where would you even go?" he asked. Daniel answered without hesitation. "South Africa." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Why there?" "I've read about the growing industries there," Daniel said. "Mechanical work, manufacturing, machine repair. I want to learn how things are built from the ground up." Richard walked back to the table and sat down again. "Do you expect to live like a worker?" he asked. "Yes." "Without my name?" "Yes." "Without my money?" Daniel hesitated for the first time. Then he nodded slowly. "Yes." The older man watched him carefully. "Once you leave this house," Richard said, his voice serious now, "you will not be Richard Harrison's son. No security guards, no luxury accounts, no calling my assistants when life becomes uncomfortable." Daniel felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. "That's exactly what I want." Richard's expression softened slightly. "You may discover something important out there," he said quietly. "What is that?" Daniel asked. "That the world does not care who you are." Daniel stood up. "I'm ready to learn that." The billionaire studied his son for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was a small smile, but it carried respect. "Very well," Richard said. "Go." Daniel's heart pounded. "But remember this," his father added. "If you succeed out there, it will not be because you are my son." Daniel nodded. "It will be because of who you become." Later that night, Daniel stood alone in his large bedroom. The walls were decorated with paintings worth more than most people's homes, but for the first time those things meant nothing to him. He packed a small bag, just a few clothes, nothing expensive, no symbols of his family's wealth. When the morning sun rose, a quiet car drove him to the airport. There was no celebration, no media, no announcement. Only a young man stepping onto a plane with a dream. A dream to discover the world without the shadow of wealth protecting him. As the airplane lifted into the sky, Daniel looked down through the window at the shrinking city. He didn't know it yet, but the road ahead would test him in ways he had never imagined. He would face hunger, humiliation, loneliness, and laughter from people who believed he was nothing. Yet somewhere in that unfamiliar country, on a dusty roadside, a young orphan girl selling bread and akara would soon cross his path, and that simple meeting would change both of their lives forever. The airplane doors opened with a soft mechanical sound, and warm air rushed into the cabin. Daniel Harrison stepped out slowly, holding a small worn travel bag in his hand. The bright sun above the airport runway made him squint for a moment. Everything felt different already. This was Johannesburg, South Africa. For the first time in his life, Daniel stood in a place where no one knew his name, his family, or the wealth he had left behind. And strangely, it felt both exciting and frightening. Inside the airport terminal, people moved quickly in every direction. Businessmen rushed to meetings. Families hugged relatives they had not seen in years. Workers pushed carts filled with luggage. But Daniel walked quietly through the crowd like an ordinary traveler. No one looked at him twice. No one recognized him. For someone who had grown up surrounded by attention and respect, the feeling was strangely humbling. Outside the airport, the city stretched endlessly before him. Johannesburg was loud, alive, and restless. Cars filled the busy streets. Street vendors called out to passing pedestrians. Music drifted from nearby shops. Construction machines roared in the distance. Daniel tightened his grip on his bag. "All right," he whispered softly to himself. "This is where it begins." The first few days were harder than he expected. Daniel quickly realized that money disappeared fast when you were living on your own. Cheap guest rooms were crowded and noisy. Some nights he barely slept because of loud arguments in the hallway or traffic echoing through thin walls. Still, he reminded himself that this was exactly what he had asked for. Every morning he woke up early and walked through the streets searching for work. He visited garages, machine shops, repair stations, factories. Most places rejected him immediately. "You have experience?" one shop owner asked. Daniel shook his head. The man waved him away. "Come back when you know something." Another mechanic laughed openly. "You look like a university boy," he said. "Your hands are too clean for this work." Daniel walked away quietly, refusing to argue. By the end of the week, his shoes were dusty and his energy nearly gone. Yet he refused to give up. One afternoon, Daniel found himself standing in front of a small, noisy workshop on the edge of a busy street. The building was old, its metal roof covered with rust. The loud clanging of tools echoed from inside. Engines lay open on work tables. Grease stained the concrete floor. Men in dirty overalls worked with heavy machines. Daniel stepped closer. A tall, muscular mechanic with rough hands noticed him standing there. "What do you want?" the man asked. His name was Victor. Daniel took a breath. "I'm looking for work." Victor stared at him from head to toe. Daniel's clothes were simple now, but something about him still looked different. "You ever fixed a machine before?" Victor asked. Daniel shook his head honestly. "No." Victor laughed loudly, and the other workers joined him. "Then what exactly can you do?" Victor asked. Daniel paused before answering. "I can learn." The men looked at each other, amused. One mechanic whispered loudly, "Another soft boy who thinks work is a game." More laughter followed. Victor rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Finally, he pointed toward a corner filled with old metal parts. "If you want to stay," he said, "start by cleaning that mess." Daniel nodded immediately. "Thank you." The workers exchanged surprised looks. They expected him to walk away. But instead, Daniel picked up a broom and began working. The hours passed slowly. Dust filled the air. Sweat rolled down Daniel's face. His arms ached from lifting heavy tools and scrap metal. By sunset, his hands were already stained with grease. Victor watched from a distance. Most newcomers quit within an hour, but Daniel kept working silently. Finally, Victor walked over. "You can come back tomorrow," he said. Daniel smiled slightly. "Thank you." But the other workers were not impressed. As Daniel walked toward the street, he heard them whispering behind him, "That boy won't last a week. He'll run back to his rich parents soon." Daniel stopped for a moment. If only they knew the truth. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's life settled into a difficult routine. Wake up early, work at the workshop, clean machines, carry heavy parts, learn slowly. The mechanics rarely spoke kindly to him. Some mocked him openly. Others ignored him completely, but Daniel observed everything carefully: how engines were opened, how broken machines were repaired, how tools were used. Every night his body felt exhausted, yet deep inside something new was growing: respect for hard work. One evening, after a long day, Daniel walked slowly along a dusty roadside. The sky was turning orange as the sun began to set. His stomach growled loudly. He had not eaten since morning. Just then he noticed a small roadside food stand ahead. A young woman stood behind a simple wooden table. On the table were baskets filled with fresh bread and hot akara. The smell drifted warmly through the evening air. Daniel paused for a moment. He reached into his pocket. Only a few coins remained. Still, the hunger in his stomach was stronger than his pride. He stepped closer. The young woman looked up and greeted him with a gentle smile. Her name was Grace, and neither of them knew yet that this simple moment would become the beginning of a life-changing story. The smell of freshly fried akara drifted through the evening air. Daniel Harrison stopped walking. His stomach tightened with hunger as he looked toward the small wooden roadside stand. The golden light of sunset touched the baskets of bread and the steaming pan of akara resting on a small charcoal stove. Behind the table stood a young woman. She moved carefully, placing hot akara into a metal tray while greeting passing customers with a warm smile. Her name was Grace Miller. Daniel hesitated a few steps away. For several seconds he simply watched. Grace's clothes were simple: a clean but worn dress with a small apron tied around her waist. A light headscarf covered part of her hair. Despite the long day of work, her face still carried a gentle kindness. Daniel reached slowly into his pocket. Only a few coins. Not enough for a full meal. His pride told him to walk away, but his empty stomach refused. He stepped forward quietly. Grace looked up immediately and smiled. "Good evening," she said kindly. Her voice was soft but cheerful. Daniel nodded politely. "Good evening." He glanced at the food again, then back at the coins in his hand. Grace noticed the hesitation in his eyes. "You look tired," she said gently. Daniel tried to smile. "Just a long day." She studied his face for a moment. His clothes were slightly dirty from workshop grease. His shoulders looked heavy with exhaustion. "You work at the mechanic shops nearby?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes, I'm learning." Grace reached into the tray and placed several pieces of akara into a small paper wrap. Then she added a piece of bread. Daniel quickly shook his head. "Oh, wait, I don't think I have enough money for that." Grace simply pushed the food gently toward him. "Eat first," she said. Daniel looked confused. "But I can't pay for all of it." Grace smiled again. Then pay tomorrow. Daniel stared at her in surprise. In the past weeks since arriving in Johannesburg, most people had either ignored him or laughed at him. No one had shown him simple kindness like this. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. Grace nodded. Everyone needs help sometimes. Daniel slowly accepted the food. "Thank you," he said sincerely. He sat on a nearby wooden bench and began eating. The warm food filled his stomach, and for the first time that day, he felt real comfort. Grace continued serving other customers while occasionally glancing toward him. Something about the quiet young mechanic caught her attention. When the last customer left, she walked over. "You're new here, aren't you?" she asked. Daniel wiped his hands with a napkin and nodded. "Yes, I arrived a few weeks ago." "From where?" Daniel hesitated briefly. He could not reveal the truth. "From Nigeria," he answered. Grace's eyes brightened slightly. "Me too." Daniel looked surprised. "Really?" Grace nodded. "I came here when I was younger." For a moment she looked down at the ground, her smile fading slightly. "I grew up in an orphanage," she added softly. Daniel felt a sudden wave of sympathy. "That must have been difficult." Grace shrugged gently. "It was, but life teaches you how to survive." Daniel looked at her with quiet respect. Even after everything she had been through, she still smiled easily. "You sell food here every day?" he asked. "Yes," Grace replied, "morning and evening." She looked toward the mechanic street nearby. "A lot of workers pass here when they finish work." Daniel chuckled slightly. "Then I guess I'm one of your customers now." Grace laughed softly. "You can be." A comfortable silence followed. The sky slowly darkened above them. Street lights flickered on one by one. Daniel finally stood up. "I should go," he said. Grace nodded. "Don't forget you still owe me tomorrow." Daniel smiled. "I won't." As he began walking away, he turned once more. Grace had already returned to cleaning her small table, humming quietly to herself. For the first time since leaving his father's mansion, Daniel felt something unexpected. Hope. The next morning, Daniel woke up early and returned to the workshop. Victor immediately handed him heavy tools. "Don't stand around," the mechanic said. "Work!" The other workers smirked. "Careful," one of them joked. "The new boy might break the machines." Daniel ignored them. Instead, he focused on learning how engines were opened, how parts were replaced, how tools were used. The work was exhausting, but strangely, he enjoyed it. Every evening after work, he found himself walking the same road again, toward the small food stand, toward Grace, and each time he arrived, she greeted him with the same warm smile. Neither of them realized yet that their simple conversations were quietly building the foundation of something much bigger than friendship. Something that would eventually change both of their destinies forever. The next evening, Daniel finished work later than usual. The workshop had been especially busy that day. Engines lay open across the tables, tools clanged loudly, and Victor barked orders from one corner of the shop to another. By the time the sun began to set, Daniel's arms felt heavy and his clothes were covered with dark stains of grease. Yet as he stepped out of the workshop, there was only one place on his mind: the small roadside food stand. He walked slowly along the dusty street, the evening wind brushing softly against his face. Cars passed occasionally, and the distant sound of music drifted from nearby shops. Soon he saw the familiar wooden table. Grace was there again, arranging bread neatly in a basket while the charcoal stove warmed a new batch of akara. When she looked up and saw Daniel approaching, her face brightened instantly. "Well," she said with a playful smile, "look who finally came back to pay his debt." Daniel laughed softly. "I didn't forget." He placed a few coins carefully on the table. Grace accepted the money but shook her head slightly. "You look worse than yesterday," she said. Daniel glanced down at his stained clothes. Work was harder today. Grace handed him another paper wrap filled with bread and akara. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I thought I already paid for yesterday." Grace shrugged lightly. "This one is today's dinner." Daniel smiled gratefully and sat down on the wooden bench beside the stand. Grace joined him after serving a few more customers. For the first time, their conversation flowed easily. Daniel told her small stories about his first weeks working in the mechanic workshop, how he struggled to understand the machines, how the workers laughed when he made mistakes. Grace listened carefully. "You must be very determined," she said. Daniel shrugged. "I just don't want to fail." Grace looked thoughtful. Most people would have already quit. Daniel sighed quietly. "There are days when I almost do." Grace studied his face for a moment. "Why did you come here to learn this kind of work anyway?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. He could not tell her the truth, but he still answered honestly in another way. "I wanted to understand life better," he said. Grace nodded slowly. "That's a good reason." The sky above them slowly turned darker. Streetlights flickered on across the road. For several evenings after that, the same routine continued. Daniel worked during the day, then he walked to Grace's stand in the evening. Sometimes they talked about work, sometimes they talked about childhood memories, sometimes they simply sat quietly watching the busy street. One evening, Daniel arrived looking more exhausted than usual. His shoulders slumped and his face showed frustration. Grace noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel sat down heavily. Today was terrible. Grace sat beside him. "Tell me." Daniel rubbed his hands together, still stained with machine oil. "I spent hours trying to fix a broken engine part," he said, "but I made the problem worse." Grace listened silently. "The other workers laughed at me," Daniel continued. "One of them said I should go back to wherever I came from because I will never be a real mechanic." Grace frowned slightly. That was not kind. Daniel stared at the ground. For a moment, I almost walked away from the workshop. Grace looked at him seriously. "Did you?" Daniel shook his head. "No." Grace smiled proudly. "Good." Daniel looked up. "You think so?" "Yes," Grace replied firmly. "Learning something new is always difficult, but if you quit every time people laugh at you, you will never reach your goal." Daniel thought about her words carefully. Grace continued, "Do you know how many times people mocked me when I first started selling food here?" she said. Daniel looked surprised. "They did?" Grace nodded. "They said a young girl could never survive alone in this city. Some people refused to buy from me because they thought my food would not taste good." She smiled slightly, but I kept working. Daniel chuckled softly. "And now you have customers every evening." Grace gestured proudly at her stand. "Exactly." Daniel looked at her with admiration. "You're stronger than you look." Grace laughed. "Life teaches you strength whether you want it or not." A peaceful silence followed. Cars passed slowly along the road. The smell of fried akara filled the air again. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Thank you." Grace tilted her head. "For what?" "For reminding me not to give up." Grace smiled gently. "That's what friends are for." The word friends lingered quietly between them. Daniel felt something warm grow inside his chest. He had come to South Africa expecting only struggle and hard lessons, but somehow, in the middle of all that difficulty, he had found someone who believed in him. And though neither of them realized it yet, their friendship was slowly turning into something much deeper. The following weeks were not easy for Daniel. Every morning before sunrise, he walked through the dusty streets toward Victor's workshop. The air was often cold, and the city had not fully woken up yet, but inside the small mechanical shop, the noise of metal and engines always began early. Victor was already there most mornings. "Don't be late," he would say firmly whenever Daniel arrived. Daniel never argued. He simply nodded and began working. At first, the tasks were simple, cleaning tools, carrying heavy engine parts, and sweeping the floor. But as time passed, Victor slowly allowed him to do more complicated work. Daniel studied every machine carefully. He asked questions. He observed the movements of experienced mechanics, but not everyone in the workshop liked him. Some of the workers had begun to feel irritated by Daniel's determination. One mechanic in particular, named Marcus, seemed especially bothered by him. Marcus was a tall Nigerian African man in his early 30s with a loud voice and a rough personality. He had worked in the shop for years and believed new workers should suffer before being respected. From the first day, Marcus enjoyed mocking Daniel. One afternoon, while Daniel carefully tried to repair a damaged engine part, Marcus leaned against a nearby table and laughed. "Look at him," Marcus said loudly to the other workers. "The new boy thinks he's an engineer." Several of the mechanics chuckled. Daniel kept working silently. Marcus stepped closer. "You know," he continued, "people like you don't survive long in places like this." Daniel still said nothing. He tightened the bolt slowly and focused on the engine. Marcus suddenly grabbed the wrench from Daniel's hand. "You're doing it wrong," he said with a smirk. Before Daniel could respond, Marcus tossed the tool back onto the table. "Actually," Marcus added loudly, "maybe the problem isn't the machine." The other workers looked up curiously. Marcus pointed directly at Daniel. "Maybe the problem is that he doesn't belong here." More laughter filled the workshop. Victor glanced over from across the room but said nothing. Daniel's face burned with embarrassment, but instead of arguing, he quietly picked up the wrench and continued working. Inside, however, his frustration was growing. Later that evening, when the workshop finally closed, Daniel counted the small money he had earned. It wasn't much, but he had been carefully saving every coin. One day he hoped to buy his own set of tools. He placed the money carefully into the small pocket of his bag before leaving the workshop. Outside, the sky was already turning dark. The streets were calmer now as workers headed home. Daniel walked slowly toward Grace's food stand, but when he arrived, something unexpected happened. A man standing nearby suddenly pointed at Daniel. "Hey!" the man shouted. Several people turned to look. "That's the guy," the man continued loudly. Daniel froze. "What are you talking about?" he asked. The man stepped forward angrily. "My wallet disappeared when you passed by earlier," he said. "You must have taken it." A small crowd quickly gathered around them. Daniel felt his heart begin to race. "I didn't take anything," he said calmly. But the man continued shouting. "Of course you did. Look at his clothes. He looks like a homeless thief." Some people in the crowd began whispering. Daniel felt the familiar sting of humiliation. Before he could speak again, a clear voice rose above the noise. "Stop!" Everyone turned. Grace had stepped forward from behind her stand. Her usually gentle expression was now serious. She looked directly at the angry man. "You shouldn't accuse someone without proof," she said firmly. The man frowned. "You defending him?" Grace crossed her arms. "Yes," she replied confidently. The crowd grew quiet. Grace continued speaking. "I see him here every day after work. He's not a thief." The man hesitated. "But my wallet—" "Maybe you dropped it somewhere else," Grace interrupted calmly. Her calm confidence made the crowd begin to doubt the accusation. The man looked around nervously. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and walked away. The small crowd slowly dispersed. Daniel stood there, still shocked. Grace turned back toward him with a soft smile. "People can be quick to judge," she said gently. Daniel let out a slow breath. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Grace shrugged lightly. Someone had to speak the truth. Daniel sat down on the wooden bench beside the stand. For a moment, he simply watched the quiet street. Then he looked at Grace. "You didn't have to defend me like that," Grace smiled. "Friends defend each other." Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude, but the troubles of the day were not over yet. When he reached into his bag to check his savings, his face suddenly froze. The money was gone. Every coin he had saved from weeks of hard work had disappeared. Daniel's chest tightened. Someone had taken it. And immediately, one face came to his mind. Marcus. Daniel closed his eyes slowly. For a moment, anger filled his thoughts. But then he remembered Grace's words from earlier. "If you quit every time people laugh at you, you will never reach your goal." Daniel opened his eyes again. He stood up slowly. "I guess I'll just have to start saving again," he said quietly. Grace looked surprised. "You're not going to confront whoever took it?" Daniel shook his head. "No." Grace studied him with admiration. "That takes strength." Daniel gave a small smile. "Maybe. but I think something better will come later. Grace handed him another warm wrap of bread and akara. Then start tomorrow with a full stomach, she said. Daniel accepted it gratefully. As he walked home that night under the glowing streetlights, he realized something important. Life had become harder than he ever imagined, but it had also given him something priceless. A friend who believed in him when the world doubted him. And sometimes that was enough to keep going. The next morning, Daniel woke with a quiet determination. The loss of his savings the previous evening still weighed heavily on him, but Grace's words and her unwavering support echoed in his mind. "Friends defend each other," she had said, and for the first time he realized he was not completely alone in this new life. He walked toward Victor's workshop under the bright morning sun. The dusty streets of Johannesburg felt less intimidating today, as if the city itself recognized his resolve. Inside the workshop, Victor was already inspecting engines. "Good morning," Daniel said politely as he entered. Victor grunted in acknowledgement. "Get to work." Daniel didn't complain. He rolled up his sleeves and approached the engine that Marcus had mocked him over the day before. Every bolt, every pipe, every spark plug, he handled with careful precision. He remembered every small lesson he had observed and every correction Victor had made. Hours passed. Sweat rolled down Daniel's face, and his hands were black with grease. Marcus glanced over occasionally, but this time there was no laughter. Instead, a faint flicker of surprise crossed his face each time Daniel performed the task correctly. By midday, Victor walked over. "Not bad," he said, examining Daniel's work on a complex engine part. "You're improving." Daniel felt a surge of pride. "Thank you, sir," he replied quietly, but his eyes glimmered with satisfaction. Victor's stern face softened slightly. "Keep it up, and one day you might actually earn a place here among the others." Daniel nodded, determination etched into his features. Marcus, watching from across the workshop, clenched his jaw, clearly irritated that Daniel's skill was growing. After the long morning, Daniel decided to take a short break. He walked toward the street where Grace's stand awaited him. She smiled brightly as he approached, handing him a warm wrap of bread and freshly fried akara. "You've been working hard," she said, her eyes soft with genuine concern. "Eat before you go back." Daniel accepted it gratefully. "Thanks, Grace. I feel like I'm finally making progress." Grace's smile widened. "I knew you could do it. You just had to believe." They sat together on the wooden bench beside her stand, sharing quiet conversation. The evening sun cast a golden glow on their faces, reflecting the warmth of a friendship growing stronger each day. Back at the workshop, Daniel's confidence had begun to change the atmosphere. Where other workers had once mocked him, some now offered small nods of approval when he completed a difficult task. Even Marcus found it harder to openly belittle him. By nightfall, Daniel returned to Grace's stand once more. He recounted the day's progress, laughing softly at the small victories and mistakes that had shaped his learning. Grace listened, eyes sparkling with encouragement. "See, every day counts," she said, "even the hard ones." Daniel smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The harsh streets of Johannesburg, the mocking co-workers, the sleepless nights, all of it had begun to feel like part of a journey he could truly handle. For the first time, he believed not just in the work he was doing, but in himself. And as he watched the golden sunset fading into the soft glow of streetlights, Daniel realized something profound. Life could be hard. People could doubt him, and setbacks could come at any moment. But with determination, hard work, and someone like Grace by his side, he could begin building the life he had always wanted, one careful, deliberate step at a time. The night grew calm, but inside Daniel, a quiet fire burned. He was no longer just a boy lost in a new city. He was becoming someone who could withstand life's trials and emerge stronger on the other side. By the following morning, Daniel had made a decision. He had spent months learning, working tirelessly in Victor's workshop, enduring mocking laughter, humiliation, and even the theft of his hard-earned savings. Yet each struggle had strengthened him. Every lesson, every failure, and every act of kindness from Grace had built a foundation he could rely on. He was ready. Daniel returned to Victor's workshop one last time, not as a boy unsure of his place, but as a man ready to take the next step. "Sir," he said politely, "I've learned a lot here, but I want to start my own small machine workshop. I want to build my own way and see what I can achieve." Victor studied him silently, then slowly nodded. "You've come far, but remember, success won't come easy. There will be challenges you don't yet see." Daniel's expression was resolute. "I understand. I'm ready for them." The next days were a whirlwind of preparation. He found a small, rundown building on the edge of town that could serve as his first workshop. Dusty and cluttered, with old tools left behind, it looked nothing like the polished garages of the city, but it was enough. He cleaned tirelessly, scrubbing floors, moving scrap metal, and repairing broken equipment. His hands were covered in grime, his clothes torn in places, but his face glowed with determination and hope. Grace arrived one afternoon carrying fresh bread and akara. Her smile brightened the dark, dusty space. "You're really doing this," she said, eyes wide with admiration. "I have to try," Daniel replied, smiling softly. "I can't stay a student forever." Grace nodded. "Then I'll help. You'll need someone to keep you going when it gets hard." And so she stayed by his side, helping clean, organize, and even offering encouragement when the long hours seemed unbearable. But the streets were not without challenges. Some of the local workers from other workshops eyed Daniel suspiciously, wary of this young man daring to open his own place. Marcus appeared one morning, sneering as he watched Daniel tighten a bolt. "Thought you couldn't survive on your own," Marcus said, mockingly. "Looks like even this small place will fail." Daniel didn't reply. He simply kept working, sweat dripping down his face, every movement precise and calculated. Grace watched silently nearby, her expression steady and supportive. Days turned into weeks. Business was slow at first, but word began to spread. Daniel's attention to detail, honesty, and willingness to help people earned him loyal customers. People admired his skill and the integrity with which he ran his workshop. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Daniel and Grace sat on the wooden bench outside the workshop, sharing a simple meal. "Look at it," Grace said softly, gesturing toward the small building. "All this started because you refused to quit." Daniel smiled, taking a bite of bread. "And because I had someone to believe in me," he replied, looking at Grace. His eyes held a quiet warmth. Grace laughed lightly. "Don't forget, you still have to believe in yourself, too." Daniel nodded. "I do. Now more than ever." They sat together in silence for a few moments, the hum of the city around them fading into the background. This small workshop, humble and dusty as it was, became the foundation of their shared dreams. And for Daniel, it was more than just a place to fix machines. It was a testament to perseverance, hard work, and the power of trust and friendship. As night fell and the streetlights flickered on, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Challenges would come, rivalries would test them, and there would be moments of doubt. But with Grace by his side, he felt ready to face anything. The journey had begun, and for the first time Daniel truly believed in the life he was building step by step, dream by dream. Months passed, and Daniel's small workshop began to gain a reputation. Word spread about his skill, attention to detail, and honesty. Customers returned regularly, praising the quality of his work, and his small corner of Johannesburg slowly began to thrive. But success often attracts envy. One morning, as Daniel was repairing a broken engine, a group of men from a larger nearby workshop arrived. Their leader, a tall Nigerian African man in his late 30s named Samuel, stepped forward, eyes sharp and calculating. "So, this is the little workshop everyone is talking about," Samuel said, voice dripping with condescension. "Looks like someone's trying to play with the big boys." Daniel looked up calmly. "We all start somewhere. I'm just trying to do my work properly." Samuel smirked. "Work properly? In this small shed? People like you shouldn't be trying to compete with established businesses." The men laughed quietly, circling the small workshop. Grace stood nearby, adjusting the trays of bread and akara, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the tension. Daniel wiped grease from his hands, speaking quietly but firmly. "I don't intend to compete. I just want to serve my customers honestly." Samuel's eyes glinted. "Honesty is fine, until it costs us business." That evening, after the men left, Daniel and Grace sat on the wooden bench outside the workshop. Daniel's jaw was tight, eyes focused on the darkening street. "They won't stop," he said softly. "They'll try to ruin us." Grace placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Then we'll just have to be smarter and stronger. You've built this far already. Don't let anyone take it away." Days turned into weeks. Daniel and Grace worked tirelessly, repairing engines late into the night, managing customers, and maintaining the small workshop. But Samuel's men began spreading rumors about the quality of Daniel's work, trying to lure away customers with promises of lower prices and flashy advertisements. One afternoon, a loyal customer came running to the workshop, panic on his face. "Someone damaged my car after it left your workshop," he exclaimed. Daniel's heart sank. He examined the engine carefully and realized that the work had been tampered with after leaving his hands. The sabotage was deliberate. Grace placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll fix it. Together." Daniel nodded, determination returning. "We'll show them that honesty and hard work matter more than intimidation and lies." They spent the evening repairing the damaged engines, carefully testing each part to ensure nothing was overlooked. Sweat dripped down their faces, but there was no room for complaint. Every movement was precise, every action deliberate. By the end of the night, the small workshop stood strong, engines repaired, and the customers reassured. Daniel and Grace sat outside, exhausted but triumphant, sharing a quiet meal of bread and akara. "You did it," Grace whispered. "We survived their first attack." Daniel smiled, looking at the humble workshop bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. "And we'll survive everyone after this. Step by step, we'll grow stronger." That night, as the city quieted, Daniel realized that the real challenge was not just learning work or surviving hardships, it was protecting what you build and doing it with integrity. With Grace by his side, he knew they could face any obstacle, no matter how ruthless, and continue to build the life they dreamed of together. The small workshop had survived its first test, but Daniel understood this was only the beginning of bigger battles, greater challenges, and the true measure of resilience. Months of hard work began to pay off. Daniel's small workshop had grown steadily, earning the respect of locals and even some neighboring businesses. His attention to detail, honesty, and consistency had transformed his humble corner of Johannesburg into a trusted spot for repairs. But with growth came new challenges. One bright morning, a sleek car pulled up outside the small workshop. Daniel stepped out, wiping grease from his hands. Inside the vehicle sat a sharply dressed man, Mr. Adeyemi, a well-known Nigerian African businessman in his 40s. His expression was professional, eyes observing every corner of the workshop. "Daniel Harrison?" Mr. Adeyemi asked politely. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, standing tall, despite the dusty and humble surroundings of his workshop. "I've heard of your work," Mr. Adeyemi continued. "I manage several large companies, and we are looking for someone reliable to partner with for a machinery project. Your reputation precedes you." Daniel's chest tightened, pride mixing with nervous anticipation. Grace, standing beside him, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Sir, I would be honored," Daniel said carefully, trying to control the excitement in his voice. The next weeks were intense. Daniel and Grace worked tirelessly to prepare for the project. Their workshop, once small and quiet, was now a hive of activity. Engines, machines, and tools filled every corner. Daniel's determination was matched only by Grace's unwavering support. But with the attention came curiosity and skepticism. Some locals still remembered the boy who had been mocked in Victor's workshop, the young man whose savings had been stolen, the small-town youth trying to make a name. Rumors began circulating, questioning whether Daniel was truly capable of handling such responsibility. One evening, after another long day, Daniel decided it was time to tell the truth. He invited Grace to sit with him on the wooden bench outside the workshop. "Grace," he began softly, "there's something I've never told you. I'm not just an ordinary young man learning work here. My father, he owns one of the largest companies in Nigeria. I came here to learn, to experience life outside privilege, and to understand work firsthand." Grace's eyes widened in surprise. She was silent for a moment, processing the revelation. You're his son?" she finally whispered. Daniel nodded, looking down at his hands. "I wanted to be sure I could stand on my own first, that I could earn respect through hard work, not just my family name." Grace's expression softened, a small smile forming on her lips. "Daniel, I see you. Not your father's wealth, not the name, but you. I've always believed in your heart, your determination, and your kindness. That hasn't changed." Daniel looked up, eyes glistening with emotion. "You really mean that?" "I do," she said firmly, taking his hand gently. "And I always will." The revelation brought a new layer to their partnership. While Daniel had faced mockery, theft, and sabotage, he now stood on solid ground, supported by both Grace's unwavering trust and his own hard-earned skills. Together, they continued working late into the evenings, preparing the workshop for the machinery project. Every repaired engine, every polished tool, every small achievement reminded them of how far they had come, from the dusty streets to a place of trust, respect, and promise. And in the quiet moments, when the workshop lights dimmed and the streets were calm, Daniel and Grace would sit together, sharing simple meals and reflecting on their journey. Their bond had grown stronger, their dreams intertwined, and their hearts filled with both hope and love. This chapter marked a turning point. Daniel had revealed the truth of his identity, and in doing so had deepened the trust, loyalty, and love between him and Grace. The path ahead promised even greater challenges and greater rewards for those who persevered with integrity, determination, and heart. The months that followed were transformative. Daniel's small workshop, once humble and dusty, had grown into a thriving business. Customers came not only from Johannesburg, but from surrounding towns, drawn by the reputation of a young Nigerian African man who combined skill, integrity, and unwavering dedication. Grace had been by his side every step of the way. Together they had faced mockery, theft, sabotage, and envy. Each challenge had only strengthened their bond. Every repaired engine, every loyal customer, every late night spent working side by side had built the foundation of a life they could now call their own. One bright morning, Daniel received a message that filled him with anticipation and nervous excitement. His father, Mr. Harrison, the billionaire Nigerian African businessman, wanted to visit the workshop and see firsthand the work Daniel had accomplished. Grace noticed the change in his demeanor. "Are you nervous?" she asked gently. "A little," Daniel admitted, adjusting his sleeves. "I've built all this myself, but I want him to see the real me, not just the son he knows from wealth." They prepared the workshop meticulously. Tools were polished, engines carefully arranged, and every corner cleaned to perfection. Grace helped carry trays of freshly fried akara and bread, making sure everything reflected the dedication that Daniel had poured into his work. When Mr. Harrison arrived, the streets outside the workshop filled with anticipation. He was a commanding presence, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, eyes sharp but curious. He stepped inside and observed the bustling workshop, engines being repaired, and the busy coordination between Daniel and Grace. "Daniel," Mr. Harrison said, voice steady but carrying authority, "I've heard much about your work. I wanted to see it myself." Daniel approached, chest filled with pride and a hint of anxiety. "Father, welcome. This is what I've built, not with your help, but with hard work, determination, and Grace by my side." Grace stood quietly nearby, a supportive smile on her face. Mr. Harrison's eyes softened slightly as he observed the teamwork, the focus, and the integrity that radiated from both of them. After inspecting the workshop, Mr. Harrison finally spoke. "I am impressed, Daniel. You've shown more than skill, you've shown character, you've earned respect, not through privilege, but through perseverance and honesty." Daniel's chest tightened. "Thank you, Father. That means more than words can express." Then came the moment that Daniel had been waiting for, introducing Grace properly. He turned to her, eyes bright with emotion. "Father, this is Grace. She's been with me through every challenge, supported me and stood by me. I would like for her to be part of our family, in every sense." Grace stepped forward, slightly nervous but smiling warmly. Mr. Harrison studied her carefully, then nodded. "Grace, it's clear to me why Daniel values you. You've earned our respect. I welcome you into our family." Daniel felt a wave of relief and joy. He looked at Grace, taking her hands in his. "Grace, we've built this life together, step by step, and now I want to build the rest of it with you by my side." Grace's eyes shimmered with tears. "Yes, Daniel, always." The wedding was intimate, held in a modest but beautifully decorated hall near the city. Friends, loyal customers, and a few family members attended, each witnessing a love story forged through trials, resilience, and mutual respect. Daniel and Grace exchanged vows, their eyes reflecting the countless nights of hard work, challenges faced, and victories celebrated together. When the ceremony ended, Daniel and Grace stepped outside, hand in hand, into the golden sunset. Their journey from dusty streets, mockery, theft, sabotage, and uncertainty had culminated in triumph, love, and the promise of a shared future. Daniel knew that life would still bring challenges, but with Grace by his side, he was confident in facing anything. They had learned that hard work, integrity, perseverance, and love were the true foundations of success. And as they looked at the bustling city around them, hearts intertwined, they knew they had not only built a thriving business, but a life filled with meaning, purpose, and unwavering devotion. The story of Daniel and Grace became a testament. No matter where you start, with courage, determination, and the right partner, dreams can be built into reality, and love can flourish even in the harshest of streets.
Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear from your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.